And we're back with the Hammer Podcast. That's right, friends. We know that your spell of sadness has lifted now that we are here, and it is Hammer time. That's right, Hammerheads. We are back in the saddle, ready to roll after a long 168 hours. Remember, half our theological brains are tied behind our back just to give the fighting man a chance.
Or we could say the Arminians a chance.
Well, that's right. Or give the Arminians a chance.
But it would take more than half of our brains tied behind our back to give them a chance.
Oh, I think it might. But once again on Sunday, we were following the life of Jesus as he proves his power over disease, but indeed over death as well. I would like to talk a little bit about that and then delve into deeper something that had kind of piqued my interest. And as I was talking to some of the others, on Sunday and, throughout the week, seemed to pique some of their interest as well. But before we get there, you had mentioned that Jairus was the ruler of the synagogue, and he really was putting his entire career and income on the line in coming to Jesus. Could you elaborate on that for us a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're reading through, and I want to say what I said. I believe I said it from the pulpit, at least in one of the hours, but it's been so challenging, and so I appreciate everyone's prayers, and even if there's any advice anyone would have on preaching through the Gospels. I've preached through John before, but
right,
this is my first time preaching through a synoptic gospel verse by verse, and it's to try to figure out exactly how much, how many verses to take, how much of the narrative, like do you do all three sets? You have three sets of three miracles in chapters 8 and 9. Do you take all three together? Do you do them individually? So I'm learning through that, but I'm finding it challenging and rewarding. But now on to Jairus.
Yes, on to old Jairus.
He was, as I said, the ruler of the synagogue, and as you can imagine, each synagogue ruler would ultimately answer to Pharisees, people in the Sanhedrin, the religious elite among Israel. So as you can imagine, if a synagogue ruler was to begin to speak favorably of Jesus, that would be a problem.
They might lose their position.
Yes, that would not...
Cancel culture before cancel culture?
Yeah, right. That would not be a very good career move for them. Okay, let alone going out to seek Jesus and going and expressing faith and, look, you're the only one that can help me here.
Right.
That would be putting your career on the line. Now, we're not told anything specifically about Jairus personally in terms of whether or not, he still had that position as ruler of the synagogue. I mean, we're not told anything about that. I certainly would like to know a little more about what happened to Jairus after
after the fact, right? What was the fallout?
But and obviously, if he truly came to faith in Christ, then he's going to be looking for another career anyway.
Right.
At some point, either that or he's going to say, "Look, man, I'm the ruler of the synagogue. We're going to preach God's word.
Turn
We're
it
gonna
into a
preach
church."
Jesus." You're right. Yeah, we just don't have those details,
right.
but absolutely.
So he doesn't come up anymore in the rest of the New Testament. This is the one time.
Yeah, not directly.
Yeah, interesting.
Or at least by name.
Right.
So to my knowledge, so it would be it'd be interesting to know a little more about that. But anyway, he was a man who obviously was desperate enough that he didn't care about anything but his daughter at that point in time, and so he was going to go to Jesus, and he wasn't going to worry about the fallout from that.
Yeah, and really, it shows a lot of boldness on his part. Maybe a boldness that we would like to see in our culture more today, where people aren't worried about the fallout. They'll just do what's right.
Well, sure. I mean, you think about people in certain jobs, and look, we all have some different different places of employment and things like that. But, when it comes down to using people's preferred pronouns and things like that, there are different people in different positions and different jobs that may be pressured on those issues, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And now obviously that's a little bit of a different context than this guy whose daughter's dying at death's doorstep and is going to seek Jesus to save his daughter, right? But yet the tie-in is that if we're going to really seek Jesus and be followers of Christ, we're going to pay a career price and an
Right.
employment price. Believers throughout church history have. Believers in other countries even now are. So for us, it's so foreign, especially in the Bible Belt, right? Because, and I don't know that I see this as much today, but I'm telling you, 20 years ago, it would be nothing to drive down the road and see a plumbing truck go by with some sort of, the fish or something letting you know.
Right, some sort of Jesus paraphernalia.
Right, an electrical company truck,
Right,
right?
right.
HVAC contractor truck. I mean, all of them. Then you go by and there's a mechanic shop and they've got it on their sign and you know what I mean? I mean, it was all over. Well, that's just something you just didn't really see in church history unless you were saying, hey, I don't want to make any money. Come vandalize my property and maybe kill me.
Right.
Right? So
Wasn't the best way to win friends and influence people.
Right, yeah. So we've been very blessed, which can lead to being spoiled in that way in our culture. And look, I'm not at all, I don't want to put myself up as some sort of, like, look at me, I'm so great. But look, I mean, I'm in the ministry and paying the price with other people in the ministry.
Yeah.
Especially through COVID and those sort of things. There are a lot of other guys that I've been acquainted with, still am, that are in the ministry and just not very happy with my stance on things, and are very anti-me, anti kind of MacArthur's church, what they did. And,
Right.
And, the whole 9 marks, and they took a different view than MacArthur, and we didn't wait and see who took what view and then decide. We were doing our own thing, even in some respects before those two kind of engaged in a little bit of a battle. But we happened to do the same thing that pretty much that MacArthur's church did and ministry did out there, right?
Right.
And it wasn't just him. I mean, he's got a team of elders and everything, but their reasoning was really the same as ours. We're just looking at Scripture.
Right.
But paid a price there. And then, I won't mention the Christian school down the road, but, I used to teach there. And frankly, most in the Bible department, a lot of the people I just don't know anymore. But the ones that knew me aren't too enamored with me. Years ago, it was because I was a Calvinist.
Yeah. There was a witch hunt for Calvinists for a while.
There was, yeah. Then several of the people who were against me because I was a Calvinist actually became Calvinistic, at least in their soteriology. Yeah, which is interesting. But then now they're upset with me primarily because I've took the view in staff meetings that girls should not be able to be in the preaching labs.
Right. That would seem biblical. Right?
Yeah, and then just on the social matters, I mean, we just see things differently. I didn't think wearing a mask was a way to love your neighbor, and I certainly knew they were not effective.
Yeah.
So for reasons like that, I mean, I'm not really asked to come, they're not asking me to teach classes over there now. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So we all, for the truth, are going to pay a price at times. And I think we just have to realize that's how it's always been and that's how it's going to be.
Right. No, that's right. Well, and it just goes to show that courage is the chief virtue. Upon courage, all the other ones rise and fall. Right? If you don't have the courage to stand up for what's right.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
But, okay, well, so speaking about heart attitudes and dispositions, can we talk about the approach to the woman who had the blood ailment, as well as Jairus's approach? What was their heart disposition as they approached Jesus, and what does it say to us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, look, they both came to him in desperation. I was thinking about, Piper's got Desiring God.
Right.
And then another guy, Sam, something, I forget his last name, he decided to...
Not Sam Alberry.
No, not Sam Alberry. Yeah, I was going to say some other things about that, but I'm just going to digress. But there's another guy, I think it's Enjoying Jesus Ministry, something like that. But I tell you, Desperate for Jesus or something like that would be a pretty good ministry name.
That really would be a great one.
But they were both desperate. There wasn't anywhere else to go. There wasn't anyone else to go to. There was only one answer. They both had separate problems, right? Separate emergencies.
Right. Totally
but they
unconnected.
had the same answer, and that was Jesus, and there wasn't anyone else, and they knew that. And so we see them in desperation. I mean, this woman you talk about putting your life on the line. She's not supposed to be around people, and she had to be touching other people on the way to Jesus because the crowd was packed in there, right? The crowd was pressed together as Mark or Luke describes it. So she gets in there to see Jesus, reaches, touches what probably was the tassel. We know at least it was the fringe of his garment.
Right.
And that's desperation. And so they both were desperate. And obviously we have to look at our lives and say, how desperate really are we?
Right. For Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how desperate. You say, well, I don't have some physical ailment that's killing me, and I've spent everything I've got to get it fixed, and it's only gotten worse. I don't have somebody at the point of death, one of my loved ones, right? But we need to have that. We need to have that desperation. We at least need to understand and be cognizant all the time that it is Jesus alone.
Right.
Jesus is our answer to everything.
And he's the only one that satisfies.
Right.
Truly.
We can have meetings with people. We can do this and that to get promoted at work. We can do this and that to help this relationship. And we can even we're really good at trying to manipulate things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I hope I'm not the only one. Right? So, but at the end of the day, we know it's Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? It's all up to him. We have to trust him for everything. So they were desperate, but they also came in great humility. Both of them bowed down before him, fell down before him, ultimately an act of worship.
Right.
And then we see even with certainly the woman, there was this fear,
right?
This kind of awe that was there. And she didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
I mean, she didn't know, are these people going to stone me? Is Jesus himself going to strike me dead? I mean, what is going to happen here? So just their approach, their heart attitude, I think is, because look, look, it is never a bad thing for us to approach Jesus, right?
Right.
When we're depressed, we absolutely should approach him. But there are times, and when we're riding high, on a spiritual high, we should approach him, right? Pray to him, speak to him, read his word, all right? But it is oftentimes we might come to Christ almost a little more like Jonah, like not really happy with what he's dealing us in life.
Yeah, kind of begrudging.
Depressed and frankly a little upset and disappointed and dejected at the Lord and what seems to be his will currently for our lives, right? And again, we should, no matter how our heart's feeling that day, no matter what our feelings are, we should approach him, right? But to approach him with humility and with desperation and with a fear of an awe of his being is really how we ought to routinely be approaching him. And we see this in the life of Jairus and this woman.
Yeah, well, and I think too with Jairus, I mean, he's in a powerful position, and then to see this powerful man bow down before Jesus in humility and desperation, I mean, that had to
absolutely
send some shockwaves to the SBI as they reported back to the Sanhedrin.
They were taking a lot of notes on that one.
I'm sure they were. Yeah, well, it just reminds me of 1 Peter 5:5. God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And even Isaiah, what is it? I think it's 66, where he talks about the transcendence of God. Who can build a house that
Yeah,
God
that's
can
right.
dwell in?
That's right.
Heaven is his throne, earth is his footstool. But I will dwell with this one who has a broken and a contrite, humble heart and fears my word.
Right. That's right.
All right. Well, as we come to the question of great intrigue that I and some of the others at church had and were discussing,
Yeah.
You had mentioned this thing about Jesus only performing miracles personal miracles upon request, and that was after a certain point in his ministry. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Because it was a very interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to delve more into that and see that as we progress through Matthew's gospel. And this is one of the great things I'm learning as I've gone through. I never knew this. And I have to thank Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum.
The fruit,
As
we lovingly
some
call
others,
him.
Edersheim. Some others have written about some of this. But yeah, one of the things you have to know is that Matthew's gospel is not all of it is in chronological order.
Okay,
Mark is the one that gives us some events that he's more concerned about chronology. Matthew's more concerned about the fact of certain things taking place, right, and proving Jesus is the Messiah. So, all that to say that one of the miracles we have coming up this Sunday actually is Jesus heals the deaf and mute man, and he has a demon, cast the demon out, and now the man's speaking. Anyway, so and then we read that the Pharisees say, oh, well, he's doing this by Satan's power, right? Casting out demons. Now, later in Matthew chapter 12, we're really going to see them use that. And that's how they try to say everything Jesus is doing, right? He's doing it by the power of Beelzebub, by Satan's power. Yeah. Now, this particular miracle here is thought to be where he cast the demon out of this mute man, is thought to be after chronologically what we see in Matthew 12. But all that to say is the point is that when Jesus first began his public ministry, he was performing miracles as signs to Israel that he was the Messiah, forcing Israel to make a decision.
Right.
Obviously, some believed, right?
Right.
Few. But the Pharisees, the religious elite, they rejected Christ. Now, once they rejected Christ as the Messiah, he then began to do miracles, and this is what we're seeing now in Matthew's gospel, only based upon personal request. He didn't just go out in public and start performing miracles.
Right.
And the purpose now becomes not to force Israel into making a decision. They've already made that.
Right.
But now you see the disciples become more prominent, the 12 apostles, and he's doing this, and he's giving them an inside view of this because this is going to be their ministry in the book of Acts. Right? They're going to go around doing these things, right? And then another thing you're going to see is the whole basis for the miracles, right? So we're going to see a change concerning the message of his messiahship prior to the religious leaders rejecting him publicly as the Messiah and saying that he's doing what he's doing by the power of Satan. Prior to that, Jesus and his disciples went all over Israel proclaiming his messiahship. He even sent disciples 2 by 2.
Like Noah on the ark, the 2 by...
Yeah, not quite. Proclaiming his messiahship, right? Now, however, what we see is he will perform a personal miracle upon request.
Right.
And then he'll tell people, don't go tell anyone. Now, they don't all listen, but he says, don't go tell anyone. So that's one of the changes we see. And then that leads into the final change here, and that is he changes his method of teaching. Prior to his public rejection by the leaders of his messiahship, he taught the people very clearly.
Right.
Such clarity and such authority, right, that they even said after the Sermon on the Mount, they're like, wow, this is unbelievable. Well, then what does he do? After their public rejection, he begins to teach them. He begins to teach in parables.
Yes.
And that is a direct result of their rejection of him. So all of this we're going to share a little bit more as we go through the book of Matthew, but I just find it fascinating. And, of course, we see this in all 3 of the synoptic gospels.
Yeah.
So
now, it's interesting. So you're saying the hinge point is up into the Jews officially rejecting him as the Messiah.
Public rejection, right.
Public rejection, and then after
which ultimately becomes the sin unto death, right, when they know that he's not doing things based on the power of Satan, but yet they claim he is.
Right.
And again, we're going to talk about all that when we get to Matthew chapter 12.
Our hammerheads are just going to have to wait
That's right.
as we head on. Wait until we get there. All right,
That's
good.
right.
Well, so another question, just in regards to the cultural impact.
Yeah.
What do these miracles that Jesus performed, what impact does that have on our culture today?
Sure. Well, I don't know the people in the work that we're around in our neighborhoods and working and all that are reading their Bibles to see these miracles as we are, right?
Yeah.
But I think it certainly helps us to see who Jesus is, and therefore proclaim the true Jesus. And we see here his love for people. We see that he was approachable.
Right.
So I don't, we just certainly, as we're learning from the Gospel of Matthew, we can just in the people God puts in our lives, just say, yeah, I'm going through Matthew. Sometimes I'll even have in my neighborhood, just walk in and people, they know I'm a pastor, or others that just find out might, we're talking about work and whatever. And they might say, oh yeah, well, what are you teaching on now?
Okay. Yeah. Right. You're able to,
you're able to bring those things up. So anyway.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, Hammerheads, we've had some technical difficulties through our recording. So the caller, we're going to have to wait on the caller. We tried to get someone to dial in and it just kept dropping on us. So we're going to have to.
Yeah, we've been here about an hour and a half just for 20 minutes or whatever we've got here.
Yeah, right. So, but we do have the vault because we're back in studio. We are back in studio, so we have the vault, and our fan favorite, the Inquisition, is upon us. So, let me turn here to our vault. This thing is quite the colossal. What is it? It's insured by the Liberty
Lloyd's of London.
Yes, the Lords of London. Yes, insured by the. Here we go. Yeah. Wow. This thing is heavy. All right. Good. Okay, wow. This vault, I'm telling you, buddy. Here, in my formerly East Coast wing stained fingers, the fan favorite, the Inquisition. That's right. Now, today's Inquisition has to do with a little more current events, shall we say. So this one must have gotten into the vault more recently. But what should be the Christian stance concerning Israel and current events?
What should be the Christian's stance? In other words, how should we as Christians view what's going on?
Yes, that's right.
Well, again, this is another one of those where we're not necessarily going to be the authority on it. And I wouldn't want to say too much about this. This is probably something that we would need a little more time to deal with. But I won't say anything about the political aspect really at this point. I don't even understand all of it right now. Confused about some of the stuff being said and so forth. But I would just say this in general, that anytime any nation or people are attacked by terrorists, we frown upon that and we say that
Amen.
is wrong, right? So, and we have to remember that we're dealing with people here being killed on both sides that are made in God's image, right? We certainly understand that any nation, and certainly Israel as well, is going to retaliate, and that absolutely is their right to do so. Unfortunately, in this fallen world, we have wars, and this is one of them. So the bigger questions that people, and maybe even the person that wrote this one in and broke into the vault and put it on top.
That's right.
They're probably wondering, how does this tie in with Genesis 12? And, should we always support Israel in everything that they do, or always be on their side and that sort of thing? And those are good questions, but that would be far beyond what we could deal with right now. Maybe in a future, like maybe as in the next podcast, we'll deal with that head on.
That would be cool. That might be very good. All right. Well, thank you, Pastor Mike. And that'll be a wrap. So thank you, Hammerheads. And we will see you in another 168 hours.